Lesson 135. Present Perfect Continuous. Evidence of recent activity. Give me an example of the present perfect continuous used when there's evidence now of a recent activity.
Look at David. He's covered in mud. I think he's been working in his garden.
How can we tell when somebody's been running a lot?
We can tell when somebody's been running a lot because they're breathing heavily.
When we arrive at someone's house, how can we tell if they've recently been cooking?
When we arrive at someone's house, we can tell if they've recently been cooking because we can smell the food.
Give me an example of the past perfect continuous used in the same way, please.
When I walked into the living room, both the children looked really angry. It was clear they had been arguing.
To take into account. Tip. When considering the price of a meal in a restaurant, do you take into account such things as the service charge and the waiter's tip?
Yes, when considering the price of a meal in a restaurant, I take into account such things as the service charge and the waiter's tip.
What part of my finger is this?
That's the tip of your finger.
What do we say when we're trying to think of a word or a name that we know well, but we cannot remember it immediately?
When we are trying to think of a word or a name that we know well, but we cannot remember it immediately, we say it's on the tip of our tongue.
Make up your mind. When you're buying something like a new phone or watch, do you have trouble making up your mind which one to buy?
Yes, when I'm buying something like a new phone or watch, I have trouble making up my mind which one to buy.
Delicate. What would happen if you washed some delicate clothes in a washing machine at a high temperature?
If I washed some delicate clothes in a washing machine at a high temperature, they would get damaged or become smaller.
Observe. Observation. Do people behave differently from how they normally do when they think they're not being observed by others?
Yes, people behave differently from how they normally do when they think they are not being observed by others.
Why do you think this is?
I think this is because when they are not being observed, they think they can behave as they like.
Does a detective need to have good powers of observation?
Yes, a detective needs to have good powers of observation.
Historic. Do you think it's right for governments to spend public money on preserving historic buildings, or do you think public money should be spent in other ways?
I think it's right for governments to spend public money on preserving historic buildings.
Paw. Claw. What's a paw?
A paw is the foot of an animal which has claws, like that of a cat, a dog, a lion, etc.
Wooden. Hut. Woolen. Silken. Golden. What's a wooden hut?
A wooden hut is a hut made of wood.
What's a woolen hat?
A woolen hat is a hat made of wool.
What's a silk dress?
A silk dress is a dress made of silk.
What's silken hair?
Silken hair is hair like silk.
What's a gold watch?
A gold watch is a watch made of gold.
What's golden skin?
Golden skin is skin that looks like gold in colour.
Every other day. Do you have English lessons every day or every other day?
I have English lessons every day, not every other day.
Assist. Assistant. Pushchair. If you notice somebody struggling to get a pushchair onto a bus, would you assist them?
Yes, if I noticed somebody struggling to get a pushchair onto a bus, I would assist them.
Would you say the shop assistants in this country were reasonably polite and helpful?
Yes, I'd say the shop assistants in this country were reasonably polite and helpful.
Otherwise. Engaged. If someone called you on your mobile and you were otherwise engaged with something important, would you take the call?
No, if someone called me on my mobile and I was otherwise engaged with something important, I wouldn't take the call.
If a car had one broken window but otherwise was in good condition, would you buy it?
Yes, if a car had one broken window but otherwise was in good condition, I would buy it.
Perform. Performance. Trick. Magic. If you had to perform in a play, what kind of part would you like to perform?
If I had to perform in a play, the kind of part I'd like to perform would be that of the bad man.
Can you perform any magic tricks?
No, I can't perform any magic tricks.
Name an actor who you think always gives good performances in films.
An actor who I think always gives good performances in films is Gene Wilder.
Envy. Envious. Celebrity. Fame. What kind of people do you envy?
I envy no one.
Are you envious of the fame that celebrities have?
No, I'm not envious of the fame that celebrities have.
Advice. Advise. Practice. Practice. License. License. What's the difference between advice and advise?
The difference between advice and advise is that advice is a noun, whereas advise is a verb.
What's the difference in spelling between the noun practice and the verb practice?
The difference in spelling between the noun practice and the verb practice is that the noun is spelt CE, whereas the verb is spelt SE.
And what's the difference between the noun license and the verb license?
The difference between the noun license and the verb license is the same. The noun is spelt CE, whereas the verb is spelt SE.
Record. Record. What's the difference between the words record and record?
The difference between the words record and record is that record is a noun, whereas record is a verb.
Can you think of any sporting record that has been broken recently?
Yes, I can think of a sporting record that has been broken recently.
Which?
The men's 100 meters sprint.
Have you ever recorded your own voice?
Yes, I've recorded my own voice.
What did it sound like?
It sounded lovely.
Scatter. Plant. Row. Disorderly. Why do farmers sometimes plant seeds carefully in the ground in rows rather than just scatter them on the land?
Farmers sometimes plant seeds carefully in the ground in rows rather than just scatter them on the land to prevent birds from eating them or the wind from blowing them away.
Why does a disorderly crowd of people scatter when the police arrive?
A disorderly crowd of people scatters when the police arrive because the people are afraid of being arrested or hit by the police, etc.
Tap. Turn on. What am I doing?
You're tapping your fingers on the table.
In which direction does one normally turn a water tap on?
One normally turns a water tap on in an anti-clockwise direction.
Pollution. Polluted. Is pollution a more serious problem now than it was 100 years ago?
Yes, pollution is a more serious problem now than it was 100 years ago.
Are most of the rivers in this country heavily polluted?
No, most of the rivers in this country are not heavily polluted.
Idiom 36. Get hold of the wrong end of the stick equals understand something wrongly. What does the idiom get hold of the wrong end of the stick mean?
The idiom get hold of the wrong end of the stick means understand something wrongly.
Give me an example, please.
Every time you explain anything to him, he always seems to get hold of the wrong end of the stick.